Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and welcome to the breaking news. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. Today we have breaking news as we've been able to hear that the Ukrainian armed forces were able to conduct a major drone and missile attack into the territory of the Russian Federation, inflicting massive damage to targets inside of the country all the way up to 1,200 kilometers inside of the Russian Federation within the small town of Omtyevsk. We've also been able to hear of some significant information that the Russian Federation's economy appears to be on an absolute verge of collapse, as the Russian central bank is currently attempting to seize any personal assets and cash that is equivalent to more than 13,300 US dollars for any citizens living inside of the Russian Federation. Currently, a battle has devolved inside the Russian State Duma as the Duma is attempting to stop the action by the Russian central bank, but it does appear that at this moment the Russian central bank may be moving forward with this plan, giving the Russian Federation its last gasp of air as far as finance is concerned in continuing the Ukrainian war effort. Meanwhile, we've also been able to hear of a Russian FSB officer being killed inside of the Russian Ministry of Defense building inside the city of Moscow. We've also been able to hear of some very significant results inside of France as President Emmanuel Macron is considering the deployment of French troops into Ukraine as a peacekeeping force. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the North Koreans have fired a ballistic missile. We've also been able to hear of the United States sanctioning more Russian ghost ships, leaving them anchored outside of China, unable to send their cargo into the Chinese mainland. And we've also been able to see that the Chinese are now testing the barges that we saw under construction just several days ago. We've also been able to hear of some other major news, but these are the larger pieces that we have at the moment. But getting right into the breaking news that we have right now, we were able to hear that massive drone strikes were once again hitting the entirety of the Russian Federation overnight, and we have been able to get a pretty significant list of the targets that were hit. We were able to hear that the Saratov oil refinery, the Ingles 2 airbase ammo dump, the Seltso chemical plant in Bryansk, and the Aleksandrsky chemical plant in Tula, as well as the Tumulturmet thermal power plant, have all been hit overnight by Ukrainian drones. We do believe that this picture is showing us the ammunition dump near to the area around the city of Ingles, although we're a little bit uncertain about that at the moment, and we're not entirely sure what this picture is specifically showing. But we were able to see all the way out inside of Omtyevsk, which is inside of the area of Tatarstan again, south of Nizhnekamsk, where we saw that one of the largest oil refineries in the Russian Federation was hit and knocked out. Just a little while south, in the town of Omtyevsk, there is also a major amount of industrial manufactories that help the Russian Federation to continue on with their war effort. And we were able to see the Ukrainian drones were circling around the strategic assets within the city, which we were able to see right here. These are Ukrainian drones, and it appears that they are circling around and preparing to line up and hit their targets within the area of the town. We were also able to see an additional clip right here showing us this same thing, but from another angle. We can see very faintly the drone up there, and we can now see as the camera is zooming in, the drone is continuing to fly around. We are hearing practically no air defense fire. It sounds as though they may have had a machine gun, but not really that much else. From what we understand, the facility that was being targeted was a major storage facility for fuel products within the northwestern area of the city. This is one of the larger fuel storage areas within this area of the Russian Federation, and is used to fuel and supply Russian railway locomotives conducting vital logistical efforts within this area of the Russian Federation, and it also is meant to be able to keep the Russian Federation's fuel infrastructure and energy infrastructure alive. With the striking of this facility, which has happened at this point, we are assuming that the Russian Federation's abilities within the Tatarstan Oblast for strategic efforts, largely logistical, have most likely been impeded. We do not know by how much, and we do not know how extensive the damage is to the facility at this point. But moving on out of this massively long-range strike that occurred within the area around Tatarstan, we also were able to hear that more drone strikes happened on Ingles, as we were able to hear that a second wave of attacks has occurred on the facilities around the city. We'll be showing you all the clips right here. Here's the first one of the fires that have now resulted from the second strike at Ingles. We hear the air raid sirens sounding in the background. And moving on to our next clip, we were also able to see the fire raging from another angle as it appears that another drone had stricken the facility, causing an orange glow for just a brief moment. Moving on into our next clip, we were also able to see the fire from another angle as well, and we were also able to see the fire from a pretty good distance away inside the town of Ingalls. From what we understand, there was some sort of an industrial enterprise that was hit. We are also understanding that it may possible that it was an ammunition storage dump, although secondary explosions are making that somewhat unlikely, as we're not really seeing a presence of secondary explosions. For this reason, we are believing that a major industrial ability of the Russian Federation may have been hit within the area of the town of Ingalls, which I'll take y'all to right here, and we can see that there is a larger industrial area to the south of Ingalls, near to the Russian airfield that houses the strategic bombers. It is highly likely that they may have hit one of these facilities, which may be producing materials vital to the war effort, but we will have to wait and see in the coming days if any video or picture evidence is able to iron out what exact industrial enterprise was hit within this area of the city and how much damage was truly caused. But moving on out of the town of Ingalls and on up into the other areas that were stricken by the Ukrainians overnight, we also, by the way, before we move on from Ingalls, I do have to make a small note that the little fuel depot, y'all remember the little fuel depot that we talked about that was to the south of Ingalls right here, that holds about 80% of all of Russia's usable aviation grade jet fuel that the Russian strategic bomber fleet could use? It's still on fire. It's the 5th day and it's still burning. So that is what it is. There's the smoke right there. You can see the facility off in the distance. It's still burning. The Russians have been unable to put out this fire in 5 straight days. But that's just a small side note right now. We still have a lot of other things to cover at the moment. We were also able to hear that there was some significant damage to oil silos within the Oriole region, which we're able to see right here. We can see that a couple of the silos have actually been completely destroyed at this point. And we can see that again right here. Very nice to see that some of the strategic oil and fuel reserves within Oriole were knocked out. However, it doesn't seem as though that Russian oil is the only thing getting knocked out right now, as it appears that the savings of Russian Federation citizens, if it's over a certain amount, may be confiscated today. This is absolutely massive news, and it is showing us that the Russian Federation's economy is quite truly in its death throes. We were able to see that today, the Russian State Duma, which we'll be watching here in a second, is attempting to try and stop a major instance that's happening from the Russian Central Bank. And I want to make sure that we read this out right here, because this is absolutely insane, hearing about what's happening right now inside the Russian government economically. A potentially regime-ending showdown is brewing in the Russian government today, as the Russian Duma is trying to stop the central bank's proposal to confiscate all funds from every citizen's bank account of any balance over 1.4 million rubles, or $13,300. The Russian Central Bank has assessed that the Russian economy and the Russian Federation is completely incapable of continuing on in its current state. Just a little while ago, it was around yesterday, the Russian Central Bank proposed confiscating all funds of every Russian citizen within the Russian Federation that was in excess of $13,300 US dollars, or 1.4 million rubles. The Russian Central Bank is currently trying to move forward on that proposition, practically seizing everyone's assets inside the Russian Federation and giving them only $13,300 to live off of, no matter how hard they work to be able to save up that amount of money inside of Russia. Currently, the Duma is attempting to stop this, although the Duma may end up being unsuccessful. We do not know the amount of support or opposition there is in the Duma to such an action like this, but it is also showing that either way they go, they are screwed. If the Russian State Duma confiscates practically everyone's money inside the Russian Federation, there is absolutely nothing at this point that the Russian Federation citizenry are living and working towards, as they don't even have their savings anymore to show for it. But if the Russian State Duma does not go through with this, the Russian Central Bank has assessed that the Russian economy will most likely collapse within a very short amount of time, most likely less than a year. And so either way that this goes, the Russian Federation is looking largely at the end of the war. And the financial situation is so untenable, the Russian Central Bank is moving on into implementing absolute communism to try and find enough money to be able to keep the war going for Putin. But here's a speech that was made by a Duma member today as he was denouncing the attempt by the Russian Central Bank and trying to encourage other Duma members that this this was not the way forward.
Ядерную кнопку нужно 3 человека, причем один из них президент России. А у нас, что со складами сделать, нам достаточно одного ЦБ. Да, ЦБ, конечно, отвечает, что нет, ничего не будет. Уже второй раз сказали, что нет, не будет никакой заморозки. Но не все люди верят. Вот давайте мы с вами, парламент, чтобы эту тему закрыть, дадим нашим людям наши дополнительные гарантии. Примем закон, что любые решения по накоплениям граждан Центральный банк может принимать только после согласования с Государственной Думой. Заморозка вкладов, любые ограничения, все только через Госдуму. Вот как было с долларовыми вкладами? Ничего не замораживали, но взяли и одним днем запретили снимать больше 10 тысяч долларов со вклада. Остальное, пожалуйста, там, со счетом. Можешь остальное конвертировать в рубли, заморозки нет, но осадок у многих остался.
In short, the Russian economy is screwed and there's really no way out of this. Either way that they choose, we will most likely see that the Russian Federation's economy is not able to survive within the remainder of this year, or it may survive into 2 years from now, although that is incredibly unlikely at this point. We also were able to hear that an FSB officer was killed inside the Ministry of Defense building today, adding more drama to what's going on in Moscow. Basically, to put it lightly, the Ministry of Defense building is pretty much where the entire Russian military is run out of. And let me see really quickly if I can find the Ministry of Defense building for y'all. We're just looking for this. Oh, there it is. This giant building that exists right on the Moskva River. And they also have this nice little floating helipad near it too, just in case, you want to fly in and out of it. They also have one on the roof as well. Largely, they have enough helipads to evacuate the building in case there was an emergency incident, which they might want to do right now, as we were able to hear that inside of one of the offices of the Ministry of Defense building, the very building that is the equivalent of the Russian Pentagon, a Russian FSB officer was killed inside of the building, and nobody knows who did it. According to the information that we have right now, an FSB counterintelligence officer was reportedly killed at his workplace in Russia's Ministry of Defense building. His body, with a deep wound on the forehead, practically an axe wound, was found in his office, according to Russian media. Now, I don't know. I don't know what kind of security they have in the Russian Ministry of Defense building. But who the hell gets an axe to the face inside of their office and nobody notices? That sounds to me incredibly bizarre. Maybe even a feud or some sort of action taken by MOD officials against an FSB counterintelligence officer that may have been reporting something very damning to the Russian central government here very soon. We're not entirely sure. This could go many other ways. We have no clue. But that's absolutely insane to hear that there's so much chaos evolving inside the Russian Federation right now on every level that an FSB officer, the equivalent to a CIA agent, can get murdered in the middle of the Russian Pentagon and nothing happens. And nobody even knows who did it. Nobody has a clue right now. It's a complete mystery. But still, we're going to be moving on from that. Let me know in the comment section below, though, what y'all think happened there, because that is one of the craziest things that I've heard in quite some time coming out of Russia, is that an FSB officer can get killed in a place like that, and nobody even knows who did it. But moving on out of Moscow and on down into the area of Ukraine, we were also able to see some fairly interesting videos from the front lines today, as we were able to see a load of destroyed Russian vehicles. Although we do not know the location, it's once again showing us that Russian losses, even within the very near recent time, are becoming untenable and beginning to litter the roadways literally every couple of dozen yards. We see him continuing to wander down the street, once again showing us just the sheer number of vehicles. That was an MTLB. And we hear the cameraman saying that this fight only occurred around 4 days ago, and so all of these losses that we're seeing on the road are losses that only happened 4 days ago. It's not over the course of 3 years or 2 years or a couple of months. All of these losses are just from the past 4 days. A quad bike burned down to its basic frame. A sleeping bag, truly one of the worst losses of this battle.
Боевая машина пехоты была. Все, что от нее осталось.
An MTLB. The cameraman, oddly enough, he actually called it a BMP, showing how little familiarized he is with his own military's equipment. That is, in fact, an MTLB. A Buhanka.
Таблеточка была. так вот разъебашивают.
Вот где мы.
Ну да.
Эхо войны.
А это вот начало дорога смерти. Не знаю, там
Господи,
будет.
помоги нам.
Ну да, вот это все нам еще ебашить, ебашить и ебашить. Это все так оно. Ладно. Дальше еще посмотрим.
Things are just simply not going well for the Russian Federation's armed forces, the Russian economy, or for that matter, the Russian civil industry and war industry that continue to be pummeled by Ukrainian drones day in and day out. Meanwhile, we've also been able to hear some very interesting developments with Ukraine and France, as it was stated today that Macron and Zelensky have discussed practical steps for deploying peacekeeping troops inside of Ukraine. And President Volodymyr Zelensky and French President Emmanuel Macron discussed the possibility of sending peacekeeping troops to Ukraine in a phone call on January 13th, which was just yesterday. We do not know if they'll ever be moving in that direction. We're highly doubting it, as there will be a great deal of U.S. pressure to avoid the deployment of any armed forces of NATO or any country representing NATO into Ukraine. So we're highly down that that actually will happen, but still interesting to see that they did discuss it again. Moving on over into East Asia, we were also able to hear that the North Koreans did fire another ballistic missile. Information at this moment is not available in large numbers, but we were able to hear that a missile was launched from North Korea, and in the interest of aviation safety, there was a NOTAM issued in the area of the Sea of Japan. This is once again showing us that the North Koreans are continuing their escalatory measures and attempting to put more pressure on the United States, South Korea, and Japan in hopes that they will relent and possibly start to provide more food aid to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That will be entirely fruitless. However, inside of the area of the Yellow Sea, we have been able to see that there has been a decent amount of sanctions still implemented on Russian vessels that are attempting to try and skirt around the sanctions in the Ghost Fleet and continuing to keep the Russian Federation filled to the brim with a nice, good amount of money. Really, honestly, like dollars, but still, for the Russians, that's a lot of money, you know, like they haven't seen a dollar in a long time. Or in the words of that Seth MacFarlane movie, Putin, whenever he sees a dollar, he goes, "Take your hat off, boy, that's a dollar." But anyways, moving on from that, we were able to hear that at least 65 oil tankers dropped anchor after the new U.S. sanctions package, and 5 of them were off of Chinese ports. 7 more dropped anchor near Singapore, while others halted closer to Russia in the Baltic Sea and the Far East. According to experts, around 10% of the global oil tanker fleet is now subject to U.S. sanctions, and 10% of the oil fleet is a part of the Russian Federation. And so it now seems as though that the United States has been able to really fine-tune the sanctions just a little bit extra, and hopefully we'll be able to see that that additional fine-tuning will ensure that the Russians will not be making any money at all, much less any dimes from what they're getting out of the one last pipeline that's running through Europe and into Eastern Europe at this moment. But moving on from that and down towards the area of Taiwan, we've also been able to see some interesting background news as well, as we are getting clear picture and video evidence that the People's Liberation Army Navy is now attempting to test the amphibious landing barges that they produced some time ago. It appears that this is actually in addition to a currently existing ferry of the Chinese nation, the People's Republic of China, that will help to deploy an amphibious landing bridge, or largely a pier, that will allow for the vehicles to quickly move from the ferries and inland. That's actually a very interesting implementation of the barge. We've never seen them used like that or demonstrated like that, but this is actually showing that not only is this barge augmenting the already existent PLA amphibious landing abilities, but they can also further augment that by using civilian ferries that can then use these rapidly constructed piers made out of the PLA barges to then unload more infantry, armor, and IFVs onto the territory of Taiwan and continue the ground invasion that way. A very interesting and concerning thing, I have to admit, but hopefully we will see that the United States has Taiwan's back and openly supports them, so that way such an invasion attempt can be completely avoided into the future. But with that, that is all of the breaking news that we have today. And I've got to thank each and every single one of y'all so much once again for watching. And if y'all have enjoyed, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and support us on Patreon, link in the description below. I got to give a massive shout out to all the people who've been on Patreon so far and who've helped to support this channel, because y'all help to make this thing possible and keep it running each and every single day. And if you've made it to this point in the video and you really did enjoy it and you want to let us know that you made it to this point, which really is deserving of a medal. I don't know how y'all can hear me ramble for this long, but if y'all have made it to this point, please make sure to put Ingalls in the comment section below. That is ENGLES ELS. Put Ingles in the comments below, so that way we know that you made it to this point, and we also know that you like to watch Russian fuel depots burn. But still, thank you all so much once again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.